Murder victim. So to start, my mom's house was built in 1865 and has seen many families come and go. I have never shared this story before as people often don't want to hear it or don't believe me. Growing up in this house was at times terrifying, and to this day I still will not go upstairs. I moved out as soon as I turned 18 due to the multiple scary encounters, whether it be the old man who watched me sleep from my closet, or the footsteps that paced the halls at night, or the glowing eyes at the foot of the stairs. I've seen an old pot-bellied Civil War dressed man roam the halls and come at me just to disappear. An old Indian woman who just follows you around but is harmless. Remember those two for later. So we once had some previous owners who grew up in the house as children come visit. Without knowing my experiences or even being questioned about strange things going on, they proceed to tell us about the ghosts they had seen in the house growing up. I was 14 at the time and they described in detail exactly what I was experiencing, and in the same places. This includes the Indian woman and Civil War era man. Literal goosebumps when they told me that, and still as I write this, I constantly felt as though I was being watched and as though someone is going to reach out and grab me. Fast forward to when I'm 23 and me and my girlfriend at the time, now wife, stayed in a spare bedroom as our house we just bought was being renovated. One night I'm awoke by my wife at, you guess it, 3 AM. She said I was screaming in my sleep and that I was choking, as though someone was trying to choke me out. I then told her that I was dreaming, that the old man from my childhood was trying to kill me. We moved out the next morning. Fast forward again, and in talking with a friend Hoss grandpa once owned the house. He proceeds to tell me about a story of an Indian woman who was murdered in the house by a guy who looked like he was from the Civil War. It's the woman and man whom I had saw growing up. Historic records confirmed this to be true as the house was built on Indian land and a dispute arose that led to the murder. The old man was a guy who had killed himself in the house because he went crazy. So many more stories, but that's it for now. Hope you enjoyed my jumbled story. Family ghost story. Okay, first I want to tell that English is not my native language, so I will do my best to be clear, but please forgive me if there are some mistakes. So a few days ago I started to read creepy posts on Reddit about ghosts and thought about that one thing that happened to me as a baby and decided to create an account to share it and probably post other things. It happened to my mum and grandmother, so I trust them, but honestly, if someone else told me this story, I would seriously have doubts about it. Even if I don't remember that night, it gives me thrills to write it down. So I, 25F, live in a rural area in France, and when I was a baby I used to have some family in Paris. My great grandmother lived there. I don't know how old she was at the time, but pretty old, with my great grandfather. I wish I had time to know this man, because all my family often tells me how much he loved me and how much he would love the person that I'm today, because we have a lot in common. It is a bit weird to hear that and to see that my job is quite similar to his, even though I choose it alone because no one else in my family had interest in it. Anyway, when her husband died she contracted Alzheimer's disease. It was pretty sad because suddenly she had to live alone in her apartment and she started to sound confused. It was like she got very old and lost her mind all of a sudden. So one day she asked for me. I was a few months old, she barely knew me and wanted to see me, so my mum and grandmother decided to organize a trip to Paris to see her. She used to be a painter and had a room entirely dedicated to her paintings with all her stuff. The room was big enough to put my baby bed and 2 other small beds for my mum and grandmother, so we decided to sleep there. A few days before the event, she talked with my mother about her late husband. The whole conversation seemed odd. She told my mother that her husband told her someday that if something happened to him, she should go to the painting room to see him. And that's what she did. She used to go to that room from time to time and see him. Again, she was very old and confused at the time. Her disease just started, so my mum thought she was meaning she saw him through her paintings and all the memories they had in this room. It mostly sounded sad. One day after that conversation, that my mum didn't think about anymore, something weird happened during the night. Here is what my grandmother and mum told me. We were all 3 asleep in that painting room. I was at the center of the room in my baby bed and my mother and grandmother were each one in a different bed, at different sides of the room. But they both could see me without moving. They both told me that they suddenly woke up during the night, feeling like a thrill and a strange atmosphere that they couldn't really explain. They didn't communicate with each other at first, both thinking the other one was asleep, but suddenly I began to cry in my bed. They looked at me, but didn't dare to move for some reason, and both of them saw a shape the size of a man above my bed, looking at me. And even if this happened 25 years ago, they both remember seeing my great grandfather but not clearly. He was like blurred, but seemed to wear his usual suit. He was always well dressed even at home. The silhouette wasn't moving, just looking at me as I was crying. My mum and grandmum didn't dare to move. They stayed in their bed and just watched. I don't know when it stopped and how, should ask them, but at some point, maybe in the morning, they asked each other, didn't you had trouble to sleep last night? Not daring to really talk about it and sound crazy. Eventually one of them told the other what she saw, and they could talk about it. They didn't tell me about this until I was like 16, and my grandmother still doesn't want to talk about it. She doesn't believe in supernatural at all and says it was probably their imagination or some hallucination, but it sounds unlikely as they both saw the same thing. Now I'm glad I don't remember that night, but it really intrigues me. Like everyone, I heard a lot of ghost stories and testimonies, but I never heard someone telling they could recognize exactly who the ghost or whatever it is as clear as my mother did. I personally am not really into supernatural. I don't reject it firmly, but I don't believe strongly in it either. I just think there are some things that we are not able to explain with our current knowledge that may be natural, but seem scary as we can't explain them. As I said, if the story had been told to me by someone else, I wouldn't believe a word of it. But that is the story of two trusted members of my family, and they still seem shocked about it. So now I just wonder, what happened that night? Is it possible for two people to have a similar hallucination occurring at the same time? That sounds unlikely, but I don't have the knowledge to tell. I guess we will never know. Maybe somehow they got scared by what my great grandmother told them, and by her losing her mind, and dreamt this when I cried. I wanted to ask them more about it when I was 16. I was very curious, but some tears started to come to my mother's eyes, so I gave up. Thank you for reading me. If you have any ideas about what happened, I'm interested. I think he visited you. Though I understand your grandmother's skepticism, I agree with you that it's extremely unlikely for two people to hallucinate the same thing. Your English is great, and I loved hearing your experience. Haunted childhood home. I'm a very skeptical person and always maintain a scientific approach to everything in life. I don't believe in ghosts, so to speak, but I'm constantly wondering if they are real. As a child, I was terrified at the thought of ghosts and aliens. My parents were very strict about me watching scary things in case I had nightmares. Anyway, I have a few stories. Me, my elder brother and parents moved into a house when I was about 12 years old. It was a 4-bed semi-detached house with a large master bedroom above the adjoining garage. The owners had emigrated somewhere, so it was a bit of a bargain for my parents. The house had an eerie feeling as mentioned in almost every ghost story. The type of feeling that made you sprint upstairs or not want to return downstairs at night if you forgot something. So one night it was just me awake downstairs in the living room. It had just turned 3 AM and I decided to call it a night. I stood up off our leather 3-seater and stood in the middle of the room to turn off the cable and TV. Just as the TV switched off, I heard the single leather chair behind me creak, as if someone had been sat there and got up. Fortunately the light was on, but I still froze in fear. Whenever anything happened I would pretend I didn't notice it, but the second I was out of the room I would run. So I casually walked to the doorway leading upstairs, turned the living room light off, shut the door, and ran to my room. My room was a tiny box room, so once my door was closed I felt pretty secure. One night I was in my room asleep, and I woke up randomly at around 2 to 3 AM. I knew the sounds in my house inside out, and I could tell who had left and returned to their bedrooms, etc. So I was just led there thinking, and then suddenly I heard footsteps coming upstairs. I thought it was strange, because I didn't hear any doors opening. I was facing the wall with my back to the door and the footsteps came directly to my bedroom door and in one swift motion opened my door. The door had a distinctive noise when it scraped across the carpet and the handle was pretty though to move. I stared at the wall frozen in fear until the door closed again. I then listened intently but did not hear any more footsteps or doors opening. One day I was in my room with a couple of friends. We had music playing quietly when I heard a noise outside the door. I turned the music down straight away. I then heard footsteps coming upstairs followed by a voice who I assumed was my dad saying my brother's name. I immediately opened the door to tell him my brother was out but there was nobody there. My friends heard it too. The only logical explanation was that it was my neighbor who was also mine and my brother friend. Confused and suspecting I was being pranked, I ran downstairs to check the door and it was locked from the inside with the key in the door. Another night I had a friend sleeping over. We had just decided to stop talking and go to sleep when we both heard the unmistakable sound of a pen hitting a wall. My friend was the first to ask what it was and I said it sounded like a pen. I got up and switched the light on and there was a pen on the floor next to the wall. To this day my friend is convinced it was me and I'm convinced that it had to be him. He recently admitted that he played along with the story when I was telling other people, assuming all along that it was me. One night I was walking home and could see a dark figure at the end of the drive just in front of my parents' car. I assumed my brother was having a cigarette or something. I was at the end of the street and as I got closer I realized the figure wasn't there. We had a security light down the side of the house which switched if anything came near it, but it was off. Me and my brother used to try to make each jump lit so by this point I was convinced he was hiding behind one of the cars. I was expecting to make him jump, but when I looked there was nothing there. I went down the side of the house to the back door. We didn't use the front door as it was behind a porch and difficult to open, but the house was locked, nobody in, lights off. Still convinced I saw someone, I shouted to see if anyone was in the house. I have a few more, but I didn't realize how long it would take to type these lol. Hey, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.